Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is New York Times bestselling writer James Lee Burke, author of the new novel, Another Kind of Eden. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your new novel, Another Kind of Eden, how would you describe the novel?
Well, it's set in 1962. It was narrated by one of the Holland family. In this case, it's the protagonist we first met in The Jealous Kind. His name is Aaron Holland Broussard. He's one of my favorite characters, and this is another Holland novel. But it takes place in an Edenic farm. It's a very large farm, dairy produce farm, just outside of Trinidad, Colorado. But as we discover that sometimes illusions are created for us by ourselves, and that we lead ourselves down into a dark canyon in this case. But it's also a love story. It has to do with social justice, but primarily it's not about the past, it's about today. And it's my feeling that 1962 was the portal into the times in which we now find ourselves.
In what way do you think that in terms of 1962?
Well, it was the year of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we came to within 2 hours of nuclear war. And I think we've forgotten some of the lessons we should have learned back then, if we ever learned them at all. But John Kennedy, 3 weeks after the Cuban Missile Crisis, before he told his people to stand down, he addressed the United States, and he said, this is a literal quote, "Had we had an exchange of several nuclear missiles with the Soviet Union, 185 million Americans would have died in the first 3 weeks." Then he did it anyway. He rolled the dice.
Wow. Do you
We're still there. We're still there. Still out there. It hasn't changed. Mr. Putin is around to ensure that.
Do you remember the original idea that led you to writing Another Kind of Eden?
Well, I don't want to get into politics. It's not a political novel. It's about who we are. And this is the greatest nation on the earth. And I have great fear, not just simply for our nation, but for the planet. And we're in a terrible state of denial, I think, about the fact that we're just using it up. But if we're not using it up, we're simply avoiding. But we're cutting down our rainforests. Our American West is burning up. And we've given it, kicked the whole issue to the curb for an awful long time. People give it rhetoric or not. Nothing changes. And I'm sitting right here in smoke all over Montana. And this is the new climate. This is every year. It's since 1990. Huge amounts of Glacier Park have melted. That's when I think climatologists have marked this year, or 1990, as the year that is a new and very long drought, and it's man-made. We have to stop pretending. Otherwise, we have to stop pretending. It's like the vaccines. I can't understand this. people who will not get vaccines to prevent the loss of their own lives and the lives of their loved ones. I just do not understand. I cannot understand. I grew up during the days of polio. We were frightened to death of polio. And when the Salk vaccine was discovered, we were just dancing in the streets.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's it. How do you sell an idea like that to people? Somehow they're going to be injured by the vaccines that have worked without an exception. There seems to be not one incident of death. There was something, I think, I saw one survey or study that showed that 3 people in 1 million had some trouble with the inoculation, but it was because of the meal. They had some reaction that it works, for God's sakes. And
Right.
what would be the purpose in the United States government in inculcating lies to the electorate, to our fellow Americans, so that they can go out and be killed with toxic vaccines? I don't know. I've never heard anybody explain it to me.
Sure.
I don't understand. Yeah.
Well, I know that you have written the popular Dave Robichaux series, but as you mentioned, Another Kind of Eden, your brand new novel, is one of your Holland novels. I'm curious, are the Holland novels written from your own experiences in your own life and your own family?
Well, I think that's a good question. And it applies, though, not simply to me, but to all artists. And by all artists, I mean actors, poets, sculptors, filmmakers. It doesn't matter. Art is a separate category of experience, and it's a separate kind of truth. And every artist has a story inside of it, but the story he has inside of him is one that he sees and hears around him. But a good writer is a good listener, or a person watches it. And the great drama is all within just a few inches of ourselves. But I've never known where the stories come from, and I've never known where the characters have come from. I know this sounds strange, but it happens to be the truth. I don't remember my books after I write. I go back to them maybe a few years down the road, and I have no memory of writing. And it's always been that way. I think the story is buried in the unconscious. If I'm not alone, William Faulkner, right before his death, said, had I not written the stories, they would have been written for me by another hand. And Ernest Hemingway said something very similar. He called his wife the night before he shot himself over there in Idaho, Sun Valley. He called Hadley Richardson, the love of his life. And he told her that he had picked up The Old Man and the Sea and reread it. And he said it was like someone else had written.
Well, you've talked about the period in your own life when you went unpublished after your first several novels had been published. What kept you writing during that time?
Well, that's a good question again, because I wrote for 13 years without any hardback publications, and I was out of print. I had a great deal of success when I was younger. I published with Charles Scribner's and with Thomas White Crowell and with Houghton Mifflin. I publish my first novel. I wrote it I started it when I was 20 years old, and I finished it. I was writing on a pipeline. I wrote while I worked on a pipeline, 23. But I never wanted to be anything else. I never quit because there's nothing else I want to do. I cannot think of an alternative. I know where people say they retire, they hang it up. I don't understand that. When I had a Smith Corona for many years, a real small one that I carried everywhere from one ocean to the other, from California to Florida. But I always said, I want to have someone put it in the box with me. It's time for me to check out. I'm taking it with.
Well, it must be a lot different now writing on a computer than a small Smith and Corona.
Well, the process doesn't change. I mean, technologically, yeah, in the old days, we had to use whiteout. Do you remember that?
Oh, I do.
Golly, carbon paper, that was rough. Friend of mine, it was Bill Kittredge, writer, he's passed away. He said it's the difference between building the pyramids with your hands or using machines. But the creative process remains the challenge. That's it. Technically, yeah, it's sure easier to type on this computer sitting in front of you. You can erase techniques. Anyway, the old days were a lot harder.
Sure.
But the process inside, the church you belong to inside, that's it. You get into a private church, private cathedral. That's where I got the title for the last Dave Robichaud book. It's a private cathedral, and you're the only person in the chapel.
Well, when you sit down to write a new novel, that first day of sitting down to a blank page, or, as we just talked about, a blank screen, do you have an idea of the novel in your head already, or do you literally sit down to a blank page without an idea of like where the novel is going?
It's the latter. I do not have any idea where it's going. I know it's there. I see two scenes ahead of the story each day. I wake up with those. I know I'm going to write two scenes. I aim for 750 pages, and I do it. And then the next morning, I rewrite yesterday's work and then start today's work and aim for another 750. No days off for anything, nothing, unless some emergency or something I can't foresee happens. No time off.
So you're revising constantly as you're writing?
Always. Never stop revising. And I've revised books after they're printed, go back and fixed them after. I did a re-edited and republication of Lay Down My Sword and Shield, because I thought I owed an amends to the main character. He's a better guy than I described it as.
Well, when you speak to aspiring writers, or when you have taught creative writing earlier in your career and your life, what advice do you offer for writers who are trying to find the unique stories that they have to offer the world?
Well, that's another good question. And the answer is write about what you know. Doesn't mean you have to have done all of those things, but you have things in your heart that you're carrying with you. An artist has to have empathy. He has to understand and appreciate the suffering of his fellow man, as he has to appreciate the joy that his fellow man possesses. But you have to have humanity. You cannot fabricate a story And you could do it and fabricate a story. If you want to make a lot of money, have a run at it, just manufacture something that you have no love affair with. Usually the work will be a failure, but even if a person gets it published, it's not going to, it's worthless. Every writer knows, and every artist knows, of any kind, that there's a compulsion that the writer or the artist is consumed by. It's not that you don't have a choice. You feel that you possess an exquisite moment of truth, and you have to put that on the written page, or you'll never have any peace. You don't have any peace. You have to, it's like you want to stop somebody on the street, and you have to tell them this thing that's burning inside you. And if you throw away the gift or the obsession, and try to put your life, your vocation, turn it into a surrogate for your creativity, you'll probably be a failure at it. No matter how much money you make, say out in business work, well, you'll never have any happiness. I've never seen the exception. It works in another way. And the great enemy for all artists is the ego. And for a writer, the worst pronouns in the English language are I, me, mine, and myself. These 5 words. And when a writer finds himself on a television show being interviewed, and he's bragging on his art or indicating that he, in effect, did all these things himself, that they did not come from some exterior source, he's about to lose his talent. He thinks he's at the peak of his career. Wrong. He's just gone over the top of the mountains, and it's sliding down the other side. Now, the ego is ruinous. It's not a virtue with a writer. It's a necessity. To get rid of humility. It's an absolute requirement.
So have you started working on another novel now?
I just finished one. It's titled Every Cloak Rolled in Blood. It's line taken from the Bible. It's probably has my best writing. It's a sequel to the novel that is coming out tomorrow. They can be read separately, stand on their own. Same character narrates Every Cloak Rolled in Blood.
Well, I'm curious, given your knowledge of Louisiana and politics, are you surprised that more people in the media didn't draw parallels between Huey Long and Donald Trump's presidency?
That is the best question any journalist has asked. Nobody has ever asked me that question. Yes. And I find it stunning that I believe that Trump is an aggregate, whether willfully or not, aggregate or descendant of Huey Long, George Wallace, Joseph McCarthy. These 3 men had all of the characteristics of dictators. Well, one heavens, they're pathological. And they were, in a sense, maybe they were separate in their way, that they came out of different backgrounds than Mr. Trump. But Trump understands the same thing they did about people who are angry. And it's as though Trump, because he used to see a casino owner for 20 years. I mean, he's been fleecing people a long time. but he has a talent for putting a brutal thumb on the pulse of people who, one way or another, are looking for a leader, not simply a leader. They are looking for someone who will give them permission to commit heinous acts. And they'll try to skate around it, but I mean, the followers of people like Law, Trump, McCarthy, they will try to convince themselves in every way possible that they are simply admirers of a man who tells it like it is. Man is going to stand up against the government, whatever. No, that is not why they want to be his acolytes. They want to draw blood. And Trump was the one who told, go out there and do it. He told them, and they know it. And they're going to, many of them will have, when it's all over, will have ruined their lives. They're going to prison. They'll live in shame the rest of their lives. They'll always be trying to, look, let me put it, quick story. You remember the story of Emmett Till in Mississippi, late August, 1955. He was 16, 17 years old. He was visiting from, I think, Illinois, down in Mississippi. He whistled at a white woman, and he was kidnapped by her husband and another white man. And they beat him bad. His face was unrecognizable. They did so much damage to that boy. And they were put on trial there in Mississippi. Then the foreman in the jury, when he came out, gave their verdict. He said, not guilty. And then he added, it took us 20 minutes to come to a verdict because we sent out through Coca-Colas. In other words, it took a long time, 20 minutes. All right, these two killers were turned loose on the street. What happened when it was over? I think it was Collier's Magazine sent a reporter down there to that little town to see 1 year later what had happened. Both men had left town. They either quit their jobs or one of them maybe had a filling station, trucking service. His business dried up. When it was all said and done, the people in that town knew these men are not like the rest of them. They have something different in them. They're afraid of it. They know it. They're scared. Well, it's that kind of pathological mentality out there that is far too many. It's absolutely frightening that we probably have about 31 to 33% of the population who shares both thinking and the agenda of those two clans who killed that little boy. I've been around them. You have too all your life. They're different, but they grow in number. And I can't say what it is. My guess is it's pretty simple. It's race. These are people who are profoundly dissatisfied with their lives. Now they've got a man who says, do it. He does it at his rallies. He told people to attack anyone that was heckling him. He said he would pay their legal fees. In one instance, he told his followers to throw these noisemakers out. It's very cold outside. And he said, keep their coats. He talked about how he was going to have people charge you Guantanamo. He's a very cruel man. He enjoys. I think he's far more dangerous than his antecedents. There's an explanation for Huey Long. He came out of poverty. He hated rich people. It was like, Southwest Louisiana in 1863 was invaded by Union soldiers under the command of Nathaniel Banks. They tore the place up. It was like Sherman going through Georgia and South Carolina. But Nathaniel Banks, I think, hated rich people. He was a bobbin boy in one of the clothing or on one of the mills, clothing mills up in New England, and he got it even when he had New Iberia. But not just New Iberia, but the people for whom you have an explanation. George Wallace was actually a pretty decent person till he ran the second time for mayor and decided he was going to throw all ethics, decency over guns. And he paid a terrible price. So did Huey Long, and so did Joe McCarthy. Trump is not a student of history, and I feel, I guess, I don't know if I feel compassion for him. I think that something of karma's karma. Remember that it was back in the World War II days, there was a great song, "You don't get no bread with one meatball." Somebody's going to have to explain that to us. No, but the problem is ours, though. A man like this be in our midst. Our church is supporting. I think it's shameful.
Sure.
But it's not politics. It's evil. And a Republican, in my mind, is Dwight Eisenhower. Oh, any number of fine men and women believe in their party. That was the party of Abraham Lincoln. It's the party of Teddy Roosevelt. This man is a fascist. It's a fascist. It's not an ideology. It's evil.
Sure. Well, you're well known for your Dave Robichaux novels. I'm wondering if you can recount the story about what led you to write The Neon Rain, the first Dave Robichaux novel.
Well, I was in this long period, 13 years, when I couldn't sell ice water in hell. My good friend Rick DeMarinis' novel has passed away. We were fishing in the Clark Fork River up here in Montana. He said, "Jim, you've written every other kind of book. Why don't you try a crime novel?" And I said, "Well, actually, there's crime in all my novels. I think actually that's how you look through the eyes of almost any narrator. It's good and evil. This is what my work is about." He said, "No, and you got to have a copy." I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, man. 2 months." He said, "You only have to write 2 chapters, and you can get it in advance." I said, "Well, think about it." And the next day, Pearl, my wife, and I, and our daughter, Alifair, went to San Francisco, and I was down by Ferlinghetti's place, City Lights bookstore, and I bought a yellow legal pad, and I walked down to this outdoor Italian cafe there by North Beach. It's across the street, beautiful areas. Across the street from this Catholic church, I ordered an espresso, and I started writing in longhand. And I wrote 2 chapters, and I sent them to my old friend Charles Williford in Miami. It's a crime writer. And Charles wrote me back, and he said, "I think you created a character, Jim, that might be one of the most successful literary policemen in American writing." He said, he gave me a couple of things to remember. He said, don't let your character speak too much. It's the best line sometimes is the one you don't write. Children's quite a lot.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with James Lee Burke, New York Times bestselling writer and author of the brand new novel, Another Kind of Eden. The novel is on sale now, so go buy a copy. And Jim, thanks for doing this interview.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's really nice to get with you again.
Yep. Thank you.